Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be painting some trees in a field of grass, and this was a reference photo that I took myself at a park. The real-time tutorial is available on my Patreon page, so if you prefer to paint along with me in real time then head over there. Otherwise, here is a condensed version for YouTube. So I'm using 300 GSM watercolor paper taped down with masking tape. I have my gouache squeezed out into this airtight palette, and I've just got a water jar and a towel. For brushes, I'm going to be using this 1/2" angle brush by Princeton, and one color that I don't have squeezed out into my palette is white because I prefer to squeeze it out fresh for every painting. So I do have a tube of white that I will just squeeze out onto my palette, and I will start with the drawing for this. Again, if you prefer to follow along with me in real time, it is on Patreon, so I will be speeding the drawing part up. Basically, I'm just placing in the main lines and shapes I need. And my idea with this painting was to use the shadow pattern or the pattern of the light to lead you through the painting and into the distance. So you'll see that I'm not painting the reference photo exactly as it is. I have changed certain elements to strengthen the design. I'm going to start with a really thin wash of just lemon yellow mixed with a little bit of cerulean blue, and I want this transparent bright yellowish green color because it is the brightest, most saturated color I will get by washing it over the white of the paper. And I've added in a little bit of warm yellow as well, just to warm it up, because this is a sunlit scene, so the grass that's being lit by the sun is going to feel warm. So I'm just washing over the entire paper, and you can see it, the pencil lines are still visible, so we don't lose that. And here you can see I'm just squeezing out the white in a long strip so that I have access to lots of clean white instead of putting it out in a large blob. And I just made sure that the wash I laid down was completely dry before I went into the next stage, because I didn't want the colors to mix. So I'm picking up some cerulean blue mixed with white and a little bit of burnt umber, and I'm just painting in a little bit of the sky that would be peeking through. And I'm going much thicker with my gouache already because I want this color to lay opaquely on top of the wash that I did. Now I'm going to mix up some ultramarine blue with burnt umber and a little bit of warm yellow, and then I've mixed in some viridian, which is just going to make the color a little bit more green. You can also just mix in some yellow and blue if you don't have viridian. And I'm going to start painting in the shadow shapes of the areas of the field which are cast in shadow. And to lighten the value, I would just add more yellow into it. So I strategically designed the shape of the light to kind of wind through the trees and take us into the back. And now to tone down any of the greens to make it less kind of saturated, I just add in a little bit of red, as you can see on my palette. Now I'm also going to block in a lot of the foliage up the top, and you'll see that I don't put in quite as much of the sky as is in the reference photo. You can either scroll to the end of this video or go back to the start to see the painting that I have produced. One thing you'll also notice on my palette with the way I like to mix my colors is I rarely mix individual puddles of color unless they are completely different colors and I need a clean color. Otherwise, you'll see that my puddles of color, they always merge together, and I think that reflects the way that I'm thinking about moving and shifting my color, which is I'm always just tempering my colors, so I want the colors to move into each other, and that way the colors on the painting won't look as disjointed, because if on the palette they're all kind of moving around and touching each other and I'm just tempering things slightly, then the same thing will be reflected in the painting. So now I'm painting in the tree trunk, and I mixed up some ultramarine blue with some burnt umber and a little bit of either Venetian red or burnt sienna to warm it up. And you can see that that is right now a distinctly different pile to the green, because I am painting a different part of the painting, so I won't necessarily mix it together at this stage at least. And after painting in the two main tree trunks, I move back into the background and paint in some of the trees in the distance, and the further they are, the thinner they get and the shorter they get. Now I've just cleaned up some space on my palette because I want to mix up some lighter greens, and I've just used some of the lemon yellow, the warm yellow mixed with some blue, and I'm going to just start brushing it into the paint. It's a little bit thicker, and I am sort of dry brushing it in, and it takes some time to find the right brush that works for you to create the kind of textures and strokes that you want. I like having more of a dry brush texture as I lay these strokes down, because it allows some of the light green wash that we initially laid down to show through. Now mixing in some burnt umber and ultramarine blue with a little bit of viridian and some cerulean blue, and I'm going to paint in the shadows again. This time I'm going darker, so I don't always go dark enough in the first round. So in the second round I can come back when I'm more sure of how dark I want the valley to be, and just darken it a little bit more than I think I need, because dark colors or dark values in gouache will dry a little bit lighter. And I continue to just kind of build in the texture and layer up the light and shadow in the ground. Now moving up into the foliage, and I add a little bit of light in there, but it's actually more so in shadow than it is in light, unlike the reference image, because I want your eye to be following the pattern of light that's on the ground. Here I've switched to a round brush just for some more precision, and I'm going to paint in some of the branches. And I used the same mixture as I did for the tree trunk, so just ultramarine blue and some burnt umber and burnt sienna. After painting in the branches, I'm going in with a darker bluish green color and just darkening the shadows in the foliage. I also use that as an opportunity to dry brush over some of the branches, because I don't want the branches to be sitting on top of everything. And then I'm just dry brushing in some more darker foliage in the background as well, though I don't want the values to be too dark in the background. And then I come back with some lighter, warmer greens. So I warm up the mixture with some of the warm yellows and some of the lemon yellow just to lighten the value. I try to avoid using white to lighten my greens unless I want it to look more kind of pastel-y colored. I try to use yellow instead of white to lighten the greens because it just preserves more of that vibrant green color. So as long as the color that you are mixing into the mixture is lighter than the current value of the mixture, then you'll be as a whole lightening that puddle of color. So you don't always have to default to using white to lighten colors and black to darken things. You can use a lighter value. So if I want to lighten a green, it makes more sense to use a yellow to lighten it so that I can still have that more saturated color while still lightening the value. And same with darkening a value. Maybe instead of using black, I could just use ultramarine blue, which is a very dark blue. Or if I want to darken but also warm up the color, I could use burnt umber, for example. I also poke in some more sky holes, which is just ultramarine blue with the white. And then I'm going to go back and start to paint in some more of the grass using the round brush. So I use, in this case, I do use a little bit of white because I do need that extra kind of opacity in my brush strokes. And so I've mixed in a little bit of white with the yellow, and I'm just painting in some of the brush strokes and just building up, again, still continuing to build up the layers. I think that creates a more realistic look if you kind of build it up in layers, because then you have bits showing through and it creates that sense of depth much better. I like to use my fingers quite often to smudge things out. So sometimes you'll see I just use my finger to soften things, and I find that sometimes just using your finger to soften a stroke you lay down just helps it to fit better into the painting so that the edge is not as hard. And then I go back into painting some more tree trunks, and as you're painting the grass, it's probably covering some areas of the tree trunk, so you might need to restate certain areas. Now I also want to paint in some of the light, the dappled light that's coming through and hitting the tree trunk. So I've just mixed some white with burnt umber and burnt sienna, and I'm just placing in some light coming in from the right hand side. And I do the same to the trees in the background, though I reduce the contrast a little so that the light and the shadow are not too far apart in contrast. Also on the left hand side of the tree trunks where it's in shadow, I put in a little bit of kind of greenish bounce light bouncing up into it around the base, as I think some of the colors from the grass would bounce into the shadow. And then I continue to build up the layers in the ground. And now I want to paint on some of the flowers. So I'm using white with some warm yellow, and the paint mixture is quite creamy and thick, and I'm just kind of tapping it in, again using my fingers if I either want to soften the edge or remove the brush mark I made. I also come in with a brush here and soften out the edge as well, so that's just a clean brush, and I'm just lightly softening out the edges. Then continuing with the round brush, I'm picking up some white, mixing it into some of the greens I have on the palette. It's more like a neutral grey, and I'm painting in some of the flowers in the shadow. So in the shadow, they are going to be a little bit darker, a little bit more blue-grey. And in the light, they're going to be lighter in value and be more warm, have more yellow in the mixture. Now I'm just doing some final touches, adding in some individual grass accents here and there and softening out any edges that are too harsh. So that's it for this painting. I hope you enjoyed painting along with me, and if you enjoyed this tutorial and you want to see more real-time tutorials, I have them over on my Patreon page where I have over 100 tutorials, mostly landscape paintings, but also some still life and flowers and other content on gouache painting. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I will see you in another video.